Yeah, I think DMT is the most interesting psychedelic, and that was my passion when I came into graduate school was to get involved in DMT research. It's a pretty simple molecule. It's structurally similar to the neurotransmitter serotonin. It's also structurally similar to other psychedelics like psilocybin, and it's a tryptamine, and that's the chemical class that it belongs to, and it's got two methyl groups attached to the amino part of the tryptamine, making it dimethyltryptamine. And it's got an interesting history and actually a pretty long history in terms of relative to other psychedelics. It's an active component in the hallucinogenic brew ayahuasca, which has been used across South America in various indigenous cultures for at least 1,000 years. And ayahuasca is a very important ceremonial and medicinal brew that's been consumed widely across South America. Um, and DMT was brought into sort of Western science in the early 1900s. It was discovered in 1931 by a chemist named Richard Mansky, and he discovered it, and it was kind of set aside before it was investigated any further. And it wasn't until I think it was 1955. Stephen Sara, a chemist in Eastern Europe, uh, was interested in reports of ethnographers that were studying plant-based hallucinogens in South America, and they were bringing plants back, and they were curious what the active compounds in the plants were that were causing these hallucinations and these psychedelic-like experiences. And it was found that DMT was a candidate for that molecule to be the psychoactive compound. So he administered or began the first clinical trial or the first Western science research trial with DMT, and he administered it intramuscularly first to himself and then to participants, and found that it was indeed hallucinogenic and psychedelic. I
How
think
much
he
did he
also,
inject himself with?
what's that?
How much did he give himself?
I don't remember the dose exactly, but I'm sure there was quite a bit of trial and error because I think uh, obviously you would probably try an oral administration first, and I believe he did that and found that DMT wasn't
Mm.
orally active, and then had to go the intramuscular route to get the effects. Um, so that kind of brought some interest into this molecule, into this compound as a psychedelic compound. And this was also kind of occurring around the time when LSD was being investigated in a research context and in a clinical context, and also around the time of the discovery of serotonin as a naturally occurring endogenous compound that has effects on mental states and mood and various other physiological and neurobiological functions. So this idea of uh, I guess further on that is it was also soon discovered that DMT was a naturally occurring endogenous compound. So it was found in first it was found in rodents, and then it was found to be detected in human bodily fluids and cerebral spinal fluid and blood and plasma.
And when we say
Um,
when we say it was detected, it was found to be an endogenous compound. What exactly does that mean? So I know that it means it's found in the body, but I want to make a distinction here between um, did they figure out that it was produced in the body and doing something, serving a biological function, or was it detected at the body in very low levels and may just have been some kind of metabolic byproduct? And how do we actually decide which one?
yeah, that's a good point. So I think the latter is the correct. So it was detected in human bodily fluids, blood, urine, cerebral spinal fluid at very low levels,
Mm.
which are in current understanding, those levels are not recognized to be physiologically significant. So even today, after having known that DMT occurs in the body naturally, we've known this for almost 75 years. We still don't know the function of DMT, and it very much could be, like you said, a metabolic byproduct or an inactive metabolite. Um, but there's still reason to investigate it for reasons that it's a naturally occurring compound, and it likely does have some function.
Mhm.
It would
And when they
be
found
surprising.
it in animal tissues, did they find it at higher levels back in like the mid 20th century?
Not so much. Not. There wasn't really any comparative studies to show that DMT was at found at levels comparable to other, active metabolites or active neurotransmitters or signaling molecules. Most of the early work was actually done indirectly. So what they would do is trying to discover or understand the biosynthetic pathway of DMT, and they would do
Mm-hmm.
that by taking enzyme extracts or tissue extracts and incubating them with the precursor molecules like tryptamine, and then finding out whether that tryptamine can be methylated to form N-methyltryptamine and then dimethyltryptamine. And that's sort of an indirect measure of determining whether DMT could be active or could be present in the body, in the mammalian body.
I see. So DMT is a tryptamine, which means it's probably ultimately produced from tryptophan in the body. It's similar chemically to serotonin. It's similar to other psychedelics like psilocybin and psilocin. It was discovered, decades and decades ago now. They knew it was there. They could detect tiny amounts in cerebral spinal fluid in humans. They could detect small amounts in other animal tissues. At that time, it wasn't known if the DMT was produced in order to do something important in animal tissues, or it was just sort of a byproduct, and we're just sort of detecting this inactive metabolite. When do people start figuring out that this is the component of ayahuasca and that this is the spirit molecule, as Rick Strassman called it?
Hmm. Those are sort of two separate events. And when it was discovered that DMT was a component of ayahuasca, I think around the mid 20th century, so around the 1950s or so. Um, and that was, like I said, the result of ethnobotanists and ethnographers who were studying indigenous cultures in the Amazon and in South America, bringing back plant samples or bringing back samples of ayahuasca or participating in ayahuasca ceremonies, and then bringing those samples back and then using Western scientific methods to discover that DMT was the active component. Interesting note, that's also, it's just such a cool story, the ayahuasca story, the fact that not just one indigenous culture, but dozens of indigenous cultures across many different countries across South America independently made this discovery of the combination of different plant admixtures that can result in the hallucinogenic effects of ayahuasca. And it's not just a hallucinogenic brew, it's this really important ceremonial and medicinal concoction that's widely used across many different cultures. And these two plants, it's a multiple plants that are used, but there's sort of two that are particularly important for ayahuasca. And these combination of these plants was found amongst some of the greatest botanical diversity in the world. There's 30,000 species of vascular plants in the Amazon, and the fact that these indigenous cultures have made this chemical discovery is kind of a feat of science that's not really explainable.
Interesting. Yeah, because if I think another way of saying what you just said is, so there are many different cultures in Central and South America that are combining plants in a way that results in an ayahuasca experience. So they're combining ultimately DMT with the MAOIs that enable it to be orally active. So there's a couple interesting things I want to ask you about here. So one, do we know that they all independently discovered this, or is it possible that the ayahuasca brew was discovered just a long time ago, and sort of as people spread throughout Central and South America, they all inherited this culturally? Or is there clear evidence that no, these cultures were in complete isolation and they totally independently discovered this?
Yeah, it's a really good point. I sort of lean toward the latter, that it was an independent discovery. But and I sort of hypothesize that because of the geographical separation of the groups that discovered it, and the wide geographical range of discovery.
Hmm.
But you're right, there could have been some knowledge and information passed among groups. So that's a good point.
Okay, so it's used in multiple cultures. I mean, presumably, right? There's many cultures sort of in between them that don't use it. So it either had to have been lost many times, or it was independently discovered. But I think what you're saying is this is super fascinating. How is it that people living in the jungle that don't have chemistry labs and things like this, how did they figure this out? Because there's literally like millions of plants, in the Amazon jungle, if you were to just randomly start sampling them and mixing them together at random, you would probably never happen upon the exact right combinations. And yet, if multiple cultures are using this, the question is really, by what method did they make this discovery? Is there any information there? Like, if have people asked them, how did you guys discover this?
Yeah, it's pretty simple. They speak to the plants. That's the answer you get, or that's the answer I've heard. There's a communication with nature in a way that is not accessible or reasonable or normal for us, for maybe us in modern scientific labs, like as you said. And there's I'm not sure if you've read much into the ethnobotany of this, but or if your listeners have, but there's Richard Evans Schultes was kind of the father of ethnobotany, and he talked about how this is one of the greatest mysteries of ethnobotany, how this discovery was made amongst some of the greatest botanical diversity in the world. And one of his students, Wade Davis, was a person who kind of carried on that legacy of Schultes. And Wade Davis has written a few books that are just fascinating, and I'd recommend others to check out some of his work. And he is an anthropologist who has studied a number of different cultures across the world. And one of his take homes that I've received from his work is there's just many different ways of knowing. There's many different ways of accessing knowledge and accessing information. And he talks about Polynesians who are able to navigate by the stars and by measuring the size of the waves or the pattern of the ocean in ways that is just unfathomable to sort of modern seafarers, I suppose, and many different other observations of accessing knowledge via ways that are sort of difficult for us to understand. So that's sort of my hypothesis with these indigenous cultures in South America. They may have some relationship with nature that is sort of beyond our capacity to understand, and that may have allowed them to make this discovery. But that's about all I can say about that.
And so we find, obviously, DMT is found in certain plants. Psychotria viridis is the one that you often hear about. How common is DMT in the plant world? Because I know it's not found in just one plant, it's found in a number of them. How common is it? And do we know anything about why the plants are producing it?
Yeah, I think that would be such a cool study to do, is to do a really thorough investigation of maybe not even just individual plants, but like large families of plants. And let's find out how many of them actually do contain DMT, because the general notion is that people say that DMT is in everything. They say that, I've heard Dennis McKenna say this, it's kind of like ubiquitous. You find it everywhere. And from my reading and my understanding, I generally say it's found in hundreds, if not thousands, of species of plants. I think there's research to say it's in the hundreds of plants range. But there hasn't been a thorough investigation to actually document how many plants are actually producing it, and other details about why or where those plants are producing it.
Yeah. I mean, the default for me when I think about these things is in the cases where we sort of do know why a plant is producing something that is psychoactive in a human being, more often than not, it's a defensive function. So, everything from nicotine to caffeine are produced in parts of the plants as insecticides. And these things are typically, very bitter tasting alkaloids or similar compounds. And they do something like that. They dissuade herbivores from eating the plant, or they literally kill insects.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. A defense mechanism is a pretty valid hypothesis, I would say, and I think that's even come up with psilocybin and different fungi. Why do fungi produce psilocybin? It's likely a defense mechanism. Another interesting thing about DMT in plants is that it's a metabolite of one of the most important and widely functional hormones in plants, and that's auxin, or indole acid. And indole acid in plants is kind of like serotonin in mammals. It does everything. It's like it's involved in every process, and it's very important. And DMT is a primary metabolite of that. So that suggests that it's likely it's likely found in most, if not all, plant species.